In the quiet Bavarian town of Klingenberg am Main, Germany, a girl named Anneliese Michel was born on September 21, 1952. Her childhood appeared ordinary on the surface, yet beneath the simplicity of small-town life, the seeds of a chilling destiny were already being planted. Raised in a devoutly Catholic household, her family instilled in her strict religious values. Her mother, Anna, carried the burden of a deep sense of guilt and religious devotion, often pushing the children toward an almost rigid piety. Anneliese was gentle, obedient, and eager to please, but even in her early years, she bore a seriousness that set her apart from other children. She would pray for hours, often showing a depth of religious commitment unusual for her age. Life began to change drastically when she was just 16. Anneliese suffered her first epileptic seizure at school in 1968. She described feeling paralyzed, unable to call out for help, and trapped within her own body. Terrified, she turned to doctors, who diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy. The disorder was known to cause seizures, hallucinations, and changes in behavior, but the medical explanations did little to soothe her fears. Despite medication, the seizures persisted, and with them came increasing depression and isolation. She began withdrawing from friends, becoming more introverted and focused on religious practices. Her faith became both a refuge and a burden, as she started to interpret her suffering as part of a divine test. Soon, the symptoms worsened. She claimed to see disturbing visions while praying, dark faces appearing before her eyes, whispers that mock her faith. Shadows seemed to follow her, and the familiar walls of her family home began to feel haunted by unseen forces. Though doctors prescribed stronger medications, Anneliese's condition deteriorated. Her family, deeply religious, started to believe her afflictions were not simply medical. The village gossip only fueled this belief, as neighbors whispered of curses and demonic forces. Anneliese herself began to believe that she was being attacked by something far more sinister than epilepsy. As the years passed into the early 1970s, the line between illness and possession became increasingly blurred. Anneliese's visions grew more intense. She spoke of being tormented by figures she identified as demons. She heard voices commanding her, voices that cursed and threatened. Her once kind demeanor shifted into bouts of rage and aggression, moments her family could not recognize as their daughter. The girl who had once prayed faithfully now found herself repelled by sacred objects. Crosses, rosaries, and holy water seemed unbearable to her. Entering a church became a torment. She described feeling a burning sensation when exposed to anything holy, and this, more than anything else, convinced her family and priests that the battle she faced was not just trust in doctors and devotion to their faith, sought help from both sides. She continued treatment under psychiatrists who diagnosed her with psychosis linked to her epilepsy, but at the same time, her family pushed the church to investigate the possibility of demonic possession. The church, however, was cautious, hesitant to declare such cases without undeniable evidence. Priests observed her but remained reluctant to act, urging patience and further medical treatment. Yet, the unexplained aversion to religious symbols, the guttural voices that emerged from her lips, and the disturbing violence that sometimes overcame her body slowly eroded their doubts. By the age of 20, Anneliese Michel had become a young woman trapped in an unthinkable nightmare. Torn between science and faith, she herself believed that her soul was at war. Doctors prescribed medicine for her seizures, but she confessed to her diary that she felt abandoned by God and plagued by evil. Her once bright future was overshadowed by a suffocating darkness, as both her family and community began to see her less as a patient and more as a battlefield for forces beyond human comprehension. What had begun as a medical condition was spiraling into one of the most infamous cases of alleged demonic possession the world would ever know. The struggle between science and faith weighed heavily on Anneliese Michel as her condition grew worse. Doctors were certain she was suffering from severe psychiatric disorders combined with epilepsy, but their treatment seemed powerless against the horrors she described. Her medications only dulled her physically, leaving her frail and exhausted, while the voices inside her mind grew louder and more vicious. She claimed they mocked her constantly, telling her she was damned, worthless, and beyond salvation. At times, she would scratch at her own skin, begging God for forgiveness, convinced that she was being punished for sins she could not name. Her diary reflected her despair, filled with prayers asking why she had been chosen for such torment. The priests she approached remained cautious. In the Catholic Church, an exorcism required undeniable proof of possession, and many were reluctant to label her suffering as supernatural. Her case sat on the boundary where science and spirituality collided, neither side willing to surrender. Doctors pressed for continued psychiatric treatment, pointing to hallucinations and delusions, while her family saw something darker unfolding before their eyes. Her mother recalled moments when Anneliese's eyes would change, growing cold and unrecognizable, her voice dropping into tones no young woman should be able to produce. Sometimes, she growled and spoke in languages she had never studied. Her parents, desperate for answers, pleaded with priests to intervene, but the church hesitated, fearing scandal if her case proved to be purely medical. The torment within her only grew. She refused to eat because the voices told her food was contaminated. She lashed out against crucifixes, tearing them from walls, and destroyed rosaries with her bare hands. The most chilling evidence came when she was shown holy water. She screamed in agony as though burned. She tried to pray but was interrupted by voices that cursed and blasphemed through her lips. These moments terrify her family, who no longer doubted that something beyond medicine was controlling their daughter. The church finally relented, convinced by the testimonies of her family and the disturbing behaviors no medical explanation could satisfy. 2 priests, Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz, were assigned to her case. The approval of the exorcism marked the beginning of a nightmarish descent into one of the most harrowing battles ever documented. What had begun as epileptic seizures had evolved into a full-scale war for Anneliese's soul. The exorcisms began in September 1975, under the Roman ritual of exorcism, an ancient practice rarely sanctioned in modern times. Father Renz and Father Alt approached the task with solemn determination, believing they were confronting forces of pure evil. From the very first session, Anneliese's transformation was shocking. Her voice shifted into guttural tones, animal-like growls erupting from deep within her chest. The demons identified themselves with chilling clarity. Among them, she claimed to be possessed by Lucifer himself, along with Judas Iscariot, Nero, and even Hitler. Each voice emerged with distinct personalities, mocking the priests and challenging their prayers. The exorcism sessions were grueling, lasting hours, with Anneliese screaming, growling, and uttering blasphemies against Christ and the Virgin Mary. She would bite, spit, and lash out, her face twisted in expressions that no one who loved her could recognize. Over time, her physical condition deteriorated. She often refused food and water, saying the voices would not allow her to eat. Her knees bled from the countless times she forced herself to kneel in prayer, repeating the act until her legs could no longer support her. The exorcisms were recorded, and the chilling tapes revealed the haunting sounds of a young woman overtaken by something beyond comprehension. Neighbors reported hearing terrifying screams echoing from the Michel home late into the night. Despite the suffering, Anneliese begged the priests to continue. She believed her possession was a burden she carried not only for herself but for the salvation of others. She declared that her torment was meant to atone for the sins of her generation. Her conviction was so strong that the priests and her family felt they could not abandon her. Each session became more brutal, her body wasting away as her spirit seemed trapped in an endless battle between light and darkness. By the end of 67 exorcisms over 10 months, Anneliese was a shell of her former self, emaciated, bruised, and exhausted. Yet even in her weakened state, the voices persisted, and the struggle between faith and evil raged on. What had once been a life filled with simple joys and prayers was now consumed by a nightmare that blurred the line between possession and madness. Anneliese Michel's body could no longer endure the endless torment. By the spring of 1976, she was frail, her cheek sunken, her once bright eyes now hollow and shadowed by suffering. The sessions of exorcism, relentless and exhausting, had stripped away her strength. She was unable to eat for long stretches of time, claiming the demons within her forbade it. On the rare occasion she attempted to swallow food, nausea overwhelmed her, or she violently spat it out, crying that it was cursed. Her knees were raw and bleeding from the hundreds of times she forced herself to kneel and pray during the rituals. The human body was not designed to withstand such punishment, and yet Anneliese continued, insisting she must endure for the sake of others. She believed her suffering was not in vain but a sacrifice to save souls. The exorcism sessions grew increasingly horrifying. Her voice, deep and guttural, thundered through the small room, alternating between screams and mocking laughter. At times, she seemed to speak with several voices at once, each claiming to be a demon inhabiting her body. The priests attempted to drive them out with holy water, prayers, and the invocation of Christ's name, but the entities mocked them relentlessly. The strength of her convulsions and outbursts defied her fragile frame. She had become so emaciated that her bones pressed sharply against her skin, yet she thrashed with a force that terrified even those who restrain her. Her parents wept as they watched their daughter waste away, yet they too believed her torment carried a higher purpose. As June of 1976 came, Anneliese's condition worsened drastically. She could no longer walk without assistance, her body shaking with weakness. Yet she continued to demand exorcism, urging the priests not to give up on her. On June 30th, during what would be her final session, she was barely able to whisper. Her words were chilling. She begged for absolution and spoke of enduring for others. She repeated that she was ready to depart, that her suffering was nearly complete. Exhausted beyond measure, she finally collapsed, her face pale and her body trembling. By the next morning, July 1, 1976, she was gone. At just 23 years old, Anneliese Michel lay dead, her body reduced to a frail 30 kilograms, her lips cracked, her bones jutting sharply beneath her skin. Her death sent shockwaves through Germany. The young woman whose life had been consumed by visions, seizures, and exorcisms became the center of one of the most controversial cases in modern history. The police, called to the Michel home, found her body bearing no outward signs of physical abuse beyond the consequences of her emaciation and injuries caused by constant kneeling. An investigation began, one that would soon place her family and priests under the scrutiny of the law. The trial that followed in 1978 became a global sensation. Her parents, along with fathers Alton Renz, were charged with negligent homicide, accused of allowing her to die through neglect when medical help could have saved her. The courtroom was packed as experts clashed over whether Anneliese had been possessed or gravely ill. Doctors testified that her symptoms were consistent with epilepsy and severe psychosis, conditions that had been left untreated when the family placed their faith entirely in exorcism. They argued that if she had received proper medical care and nutrition, she would have survived. On the other side, priests and witnesses describe her unnatural strength, her voices, her aversion to holy objects, signs they believed were undeniable proof of possession. The trial exposed a profound cultural conflict. Was Anneliese Michel a victim of mental illness, tragically failed by her family and church? Or had she truly been a vessel of demonic forces, sacrificed in a spiritual battle far beyond human comprehension? The jury, while not dismissing the possibility of faith, ultimately sided with the law. Her parents and the priests were found guilty of manslaughter resulting from negligence and received suspended prison sentences along with probation. Despite the legal verdict, the debate never ended. Many in her community continued to believe she had been possessed, pointing to the chilling audio recordings of her exorcisms as proof. Others saw her as a tragic figure, a young woman crushed under the weight of her illness, religious guilt, and cultural expectations. Her grave became a place of pilgrimage, where even today, some leave flowers and prayers, convinced that she was a martyr who bore her suffering for others. The legacy of Anneliese Michel endures in unsettling ways. Her story inspired books, documentaries, and the 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, ensuring that her tragedy reached audiences far beyond her Bavarian village. For some, her tale is a chilling warning of the dangers of fanaticism and neglecting science. For others, it is a testament to the reality of spiritual warfare and the presence of forces that defy human understanding. Whether viewed as possession or illness, her story remains one of the most haunting cases in modern history, a life consumed by unseen battles, ending in both faith and tragedy, and leaving behind a legacy that continues to terrify and divide the world.